In the last few activities, we've looked at how writers can convey particular attitudes about a subject with their choice of lexis. Looking at Article A, initially it seemed quite factual, but on closer inspection we saw that it was actually incredibly subjective. In this presentation, we're going to analyse how lexis choice can convey attitude and opinion. Firstly, we'll recap the work we did on connotation. We'll then look at how writers manipulate their readers' responses through the use of emotive language. We'll also investigate how writers disguise opinion as fact, how they try to hoodwink us into thinking their opinions are factual. And finally, we'll look at the distinction between infer, imply, and read between the lines. Okay, so let's start by looking at this pair of words from articles A and B. It's obvious that these words have a very different effect, despite being close in meaning. But how? Well, it's all about connotation. Look at this, a rose. We know that this word means a type of flower, but it also has a secondary meaning. It suggests love or passion. So words can have two types of meaning. A denotative meaning, that is the factual, objective meaning, but also connotative meaning. That is, the idea we get from the word because of the associations we make with it. For example, Valentine's Day, a Shakespeare sonnet, etc. So, how does this work with these two words? Walk out as opposed to take part. Let's start with walk out. What is the literal meaning of this word? Well, it means something like this. However, it can also mean the sudden ending of a relationship, like this. This adds a connotation of complete unreasonableness, which really amplifies the negativity. In contrast, if you look at the words to take part in, we see the opposite. This literally means to participate or be involved in something. The implication here is that it's a planned event and therefore the participation is completely legitimate. So we see a sincere, positive connotation. A good way to work out connotation is to try out the word in other contexts. For example, like this. Okay, let's move on to emotive language. Look at these pairs of words. See how the words on this side elicit a strong emotional response, whereas these don't. Think about how you feel when you see these words. Maybe something like this. When writers use emotive language, they're directly trying to influence your feelings in order to provoke a strong emotional response. And they do this to persuade us. Basically, the use of emotive language is an aspect of rhetoric. If we can be made to feel something, we may be persuaded to act on these feelings. So in Article A, how does the writer's use of emotive language relate to the purpose of the text? I would suggest it's something like this. Moving on, a very prevalent aspect of news reporting is how opinion is presented as fact. One way this is achieved is what we've just been looking at, the use of connotative or emotive lexis. This works because these words manipulate the reader. We're blindsided. We're made to feel something that's implicit or insinuated. But there are other ways that writers try to dress up their opinions as facts. And here's an example. See how many figures this writer has used. I would suggest that this is a deliberate attempt to make the article appear more factual than it actually is. You can't argue with numbers, can you? Another ploy used here is the way facts and opinions are deliberately bolted together, like in this example. The sheer proximity of the factual number here with this word might succeed in concealing the bias. What do you think? And can you spot any more examples of this in the text? Next time you read a news article, look out for these two tactics. They're really common, especially in tabloid journalism. And finally, let's look at some definitions. We've seen how these terms relate to the different meanings that words have. But what about these words? Imply and infer, or implication and inference. Imply means to suggest something without saying it directly or explicitly. Infer is what the reader or listener does. It means to form an opinion on the basis of the information you've been given. Another way to say this is to read between the lines. This is an advanced reading skill. It's useful for spotting the difference between fact and opinion and bias, as we've seen, but also useful because it enables us to decode meaning more effectively. So to recap, we've seen how words have two layers of meaning and how writers deliberately deploy connotation in order to express a particular attitude. We've also looked at emotive language and how it's used rhetorically to persuade. Fact and opinion is another aspect of this, and we've seen how writers use various tactics to disguise their opinions as fact. And we've looked at some relevant definitions. In the next activities, we'll practice analysing and using emotive language.